very useful technique that we have is called as design for the extreme. Now, what design for the extreme does is that it takes the situation to an extreme context and then makes you think that what are the possible challenges that you may face in that extreme context, and then we bring it back to the normal situation and try to see if these solutions really work. For example, when the English movies first came to India or the foreign language movies first came to India, we didn't have many viewers because their accent, their fluency, there were very few people who could understand what's really happening there. So, we didn't have a big audience, and that's when, to make people who are, say, hearing impaired to understand what is going on in the movie, they started putting the subtitles. And suddenly, with the subtitles coming in, the overall viewership of the foreign language movies increased. Now, the subtitles were not meant for everybody. They were meant for the extreme users. And who were the extreme users? People who had hearing difficulties. But the same extreme user aided subtitles now became useful for the mainstream users. So, what happens often is that if I am designing a product or a service, and if I am considering the extreme scenario in which the product or service is going to get used, by bringing it back to the main scenario, I am possibly able to think of better ways of serving the customers. Similarly, if I look at cell phones, the vibration feature in the cell phone was meant for people with visual impairment. For example, tactile sense, when the phone is vibrating, etc., were meant so that the person who can't visually see can feel the phone. But don't you think that all of us benefit from the vibration feature of the phone? Yes. Similarly, the read aloud feature of Microsoft Word. Now, this read aloud feature was a disability feature, which means that people who can't read, it becomes a screen reader. I can read the Word document by listening to it if I am visually impaired. But the same reading application, the read aloud feature of Microsoft Word, is an amazing feature when you are there to proofread. Because I have experienced it when I am hearing my text which I have written, I can find out a greater number of grammatical mistakes than when I am reading it. Or read aloud feature is a very good feature which was meant for the extreme users, but useful for the mainstream users. So, similarly, if I go back to the cafeteria example, let us look at extreme users. Now, one of the extreme users would be a person using wheelchair. Yes. Another extreme user is a person without mobile phone. How do I make a coupon where I am not carrying a mobile phone? I need to obviously use cash. Another would be a person who is foreign, as a foreigner, who is not used to Indian food at all. The Indian food does not suit the person's palate. How do I still have a canteen which is serving? An extreme situation could be, for instance, there is a case of say food adulteration or food poisoning, or for example, gas ran out, the cooking gas ran out, or for instance, we have a situation where the canteen got flooded with something, or the route to the canteen is blocked because a tree fell down, can have multiple entry points. So, by visualizing things that can go wrong, I am able to preempt and design the product, which can be over engineered to begin with, but I think these over engineering could be very useful in the situation that transpires. And a good case study that we have is what happened during the pandemic. A pandemic was a wake up call for many companies where engineering was not taken into consideration, and suddenly they were woken to a rude shock where they were totally ill prepared. Whereas the companies that improved their performance, improved their design, structure, services, keeping pandemic into consideration, when the normalcy returned, or what we call it the new normal came, they were in a far better position. For example, quick commerce. Now, this quick commerce industry really birthed during the pandemic. Before pandemic, nobody needed anything in 10 minutes. But after pandemic, people realized that there is a possibility that I may need something immediately, and interestingly, it can also get delivered immediately. So, quick commerce is a very good example of how design for the extreme or extreme situation like pandemic birthed a completely different industry, and a new industry which is now giving run for money to the mainstream commerce. And there might be a situation where quick commerce can pretty much gobble up every single thing. Similarly, how we are looking at extreme users for movies. Now, traditionally movies would mean that I have to wait for the release date, then I have to go to the theater, watch the movie and have the parking and other expenses associated with it. But in the pandemic, lot many movies were released for the very first time in the OTT platforms. They were debuting on the OTT platforms instead of the classic way in theaters, and that after the pandemic became the new normal. But it couldn't have happened unless we went through this extreme situation of the pandemic. So instead of waiting for the pandemic or waiting for the extreme situations to strike you, you might anticipate it, that in given my product or service, which are the extreme conditions in which it can get used, and can I think of those extreme situations beforehand and try to make my product better off when these situations can come up with. So as an example or as an exercise, what I would like you to do is to list down what are the extreme situations that can get into the cafeteria, both in terms of extreme users, extreme contexts, and how prepared is the cafeteria to face that extreme situations. That can be a very interesting way of thinking about the better ways of improving the current infrastructure instead of being taken up by rude surprise. Thank you.